everyone and welcome to Micromessages and You. The aim of this video is to raise awareness of micromessages, what they are and how they can impact us cultivating an inclusive culture. By the end of this video, you will understand the terminology, micromessages, microaggressions and microaffirmations. You will have seen examples of microaggressions and as a result have raised awareness of situations that you may not realise are actually acts of exclusion. You will learn tips and tactics to recognise this behaviour in yourself and how to correct it. And finally, you'll understand examples of microaffirmations that encourage inclusion. This is a reflective video with missions throughout to embed your learning. Therefore, as we go through, there are regular opportunities for you to pause the video and reflect, and we encourage you to do so. So, let's get started. Micromessages is an umbrella term for small, subtle, verbal and non-verbal messages. Sometimes they can be unconscious and manifest in our tone or gestures. Other times they are more noticeable based on the words and phrases we choose to use. They are often based on assumption and said without comprehending the situation, or said through a lack of understanding. Micromessages might not be a word you've heard before, but when you see in practice, you should hopefully recognise it throughout this video. Therefore, this video is about helping us raise awareness of the label micromessages and how these micromessages can reinforce inclusion or generate exclusion. So whilst you may have seen or used these things, you may not have had awareness of their positive or negative impact on others before. There are therefore two sides to micromessages that we will explore today. Microaffirmations are positive micromessages that reinforce inclusion. We will explore these more towards the end of the video. Microaggressions, on the other hand, are negative micromessages that make people feel excluded. The next section of this video will explore microaggressions, what they are, the impact they can have, and how to pivot yourself. Other terms for microaggressions are micro-inequities and subtle acts of exclusion. When you look at any one of these three words used, they signal the inequity, the aggression, the exclusion experienced by those on the receiving end. Whilst they are described as subtle acts, their impact is often significant to the individuals who experience them, like emotional paper cuts. Small, often not visible to others, but very painful. To the receiver, microaggressions can signal one of many things. They can signal you are invisible, inadequate, not an individual, not normal, odd, a threat, a burden, you do not belong. If we make people feel this way, what thoughts are running through their head? Take a look at these. These thoughts are the result of microaggressions. Can you see how they can make others feel? Up next is our first mini mission to think about real life examples of these types of micromessages. Microaggressions happen all around us. For example, does an aunt or uncle assume that the niece wants to play with dolls or be a ballerina and that the nephew wants to play football? Or when out for lunch, someone on the table next to you says, "Oh, you don't drink alcohol? Weekends at your house must be pretty boring." So, this is your first mission. We want you to have a think about any microaggressions that you might have witnessed in everyday life. Pause the video now and have a go at this. Hopefully, you've all made a few notes about things that you've seen in everyday life. Now let's think about this in the workplace. For many of us, we know about the blatant acts of discrimination and exclusion. We are aware of the elephants and therefore would never act in this way. However, a lack of awareness around our own subtle microaggressions can mean that the small ants go unnoticed. So this phrase, "watching the elephants while the ants walk by," sums it up well. We are aware of the big things and have learned through policies, recruitment practices and D&I training, but we might not be aware of these subtle acts. This next section will give us an introduction to these to generate some understanding and awareness of what these are in the workplace. In these examples, you might not recognise the exact same situation, but it's important to think about, have you seen or done some similar things? So let's now move on to examples. This first one is assuming someone is heterosexual. You notice a female colleague is wearing a wedding ring and ask them if they and their husband had a nice weekend. Do you recognise this? You may not believe that you have an issue with someone being lesbian, gay, bisexual or queer. This is the elephant. But your default assumption here is that the person is straight. This is an example of a subtle act of exclusion coming through. So what could be the impact of this? This could make someone feel that they do not belong or that they are not normal. So how might you approach this differently? You want to open up the conversation. You could ask questions around, did they have a nice weekend? What did they get up to? Oh, are you married? What is your partner called? These types of questions make no assumptions and they generate openness. Can you think of any other questions that you could ask here? Take a note of them now. Let's look at gender pronouns. All of your team have their gender pronouns on Zoom and Slack, including you. One of your team identifies as they/them. You often say he instead of they, and you often say hey guys in your team meetings. So do you recognise this? We are aware that gender pronouns are new to many of us, and we have to change our habits. Just because you've set your gender pronouns to, you may think that you are doing enough. However, your subtle behaviour may not be including someone. So what is the impact for someone on the receiving end? For someone who is gender conforming, using pronouns might not seem like anything significant, but the impact of getting this right for someone who does experience this can be phenomenal. It will make them feel included, part of the team, and not invisible or not normal. So how might you approach this differently to generate inclusion? Using gender-neutral terms such as hey team or thanks everyone. This should be used in all meetings because saying something like hey guys may suggest that you're ignoring all the females in the room. Another suggestion is to use gender pronouns when someone is and also is not around and have the same respect for everybody, whether they are present or not. Can you think of any other ways that you could approach this? Make a note of these now. It's time now for another mini mission. Think about the examples we have just seen. Have you noticed or done something similar? How would you prevent yourself from doing that again? How would you create inclusion? Pause the video now for a few minutes and make a note of these. Great, let's explore some other examples of microaggressions and how we might pivot and approach these differently. We might find ourselves saying the young ones in my team. However, you should refer to people by the job they actually do, not by their age or gender. Another example of saying, I don't want to use a microphone in this conference as I feel silly. This statement may be making someone who is hard of hearing feel like a burden. The action you can take here is using a microphone, as this will include everyone in the conversation. Saying she's so bossy about timings is gender stereotyping on an attribute that females are bossy. What you should say is something like, she really keeps the meeting on track well. Another example is asking someone wearing religious dress, are you not really hot with that on your head? Whereas asking, is everyone comfortable with the room temperature, shows kindness and understanding. Saying to someone, let me explain to you how it works, may be perceived as assuming that you have more knowledge than them. This is known as mansplaining. Instead, you should check if someone needs something explaining to them. There's a great diagram included in the additional resources for more information about this. The final example is saying to someone, I'd be starving if I was fasting, I don't know how you do it. This could make them feel odd and not normal. Instead, you can again show kindness and understanding by asking if there's anything that they can help with. Now you have seen some of these examples, remember the mini mission we set a few slides ago. Reflect on the examples you have just seen. You may not have seen a like for like, but do you recognise something that's similar that's happened? Think about how you might approach this situation differently next time. We now have another mission for you to complete for after you have finished this video. Let's check it out. In your next few meetings, make a note of any microaggressions that you observe. Think about how they might be affecting people around you and consider how you can approach this differently. You may want to find yourself an accountability buddy. We recommend that this is someone who you work with regularly, who you feel comfortable with, who you can spot the signs if you're acting in this way. You will invite permission for them to give you feedback, and you can do the same for them. To help with this, we encourage you to check out the Disrupting Microaggressions additional resources that we've provided. Now we have explored microaggressions, let's move on to microaffirmations. These are the positive micromessages, the remarks, questions or actions that generate inclusion. Remember the quote from the previous slides. These are the ants that go beyond the obvious elephants. This isn't about the big visible things like hiring more diverse people into your team, but how the small things you say and do make everyone feel valued and part of your team. Microaffirmations make people feel part of the conversation, listened to, cared for, wanted, they are good enough, and that their contribution matters, and that finally they are understood. So let's now look at some examples. Allocating everyone the same amount of time to speak in a meeting or asking everyone to raise their hand is a great way to overcome just the loudest voices talking. Taking account of everyone's time zones and schedules. This may be something you actively do already, but thinking about how you can accommodate every single team member, not just going for the same slot all the time, but instead mixing it up so it's not always an inconvenience for the same person. Another microaffirmation is giving credit for ideas and actively encouraging people to share their thoughts. This might be something that you actively do, but it's something that you should be aware of, that you should be proactive with. There is a video included in the resources. It's a comedy, but expresses the point very well. Taking it in turns for everyone to make coffee or take notes in the meeting. Don't let one person assume the role all the time. Finally, asking everyone in the team, particularly the quieter people, if they would like to add anything, or as a follow-up. Some introverted people may not offer up ideas, but will with invitation, or giving alternative ways to share. We are now on to our final mission of the video. So pause here and think, do any of these microaffirmations that we have just discussed relate? Do you recognise any of them or anything similar around Matillion? Pause the video for a moment. Okay, so now set yourself a challenge in your next few meetings to write down any of the microaffirmations that you observe and how they can have a positive impact. So everyone, that's all we have time for today, so let's do a recap. In this video, we introduce you to the terms micromessages, which are the small subtle acts that either generate inclusion, known as microaffirmations, or those that make people excluded, known as microaggressions. We use the analogy of the elephants and the ants to describe how the small things that can go unnoticed are the things that we need to be mindful of. We looked at microaggressions at home and at work and gave you tips and tactics to how to overcome these. Finally, we looked at microaffirmations and gave examples of how you can generate inclusion in your teams and around Matillion. Throughout the video, we covered many mini missions, which we encourage you to participate in to embed this learning. We'll remind you of these now. Here are all of the mini missions. Have a read of these now to recap yourself. We will post these on the greenhouse so you can easily refer back to them at any time. So, what now? We encourage you to expand your learning around micromessages by looking at the further resources that we've provided on the greenhouse. This includes material on disrupting microaggressions, articles for further reading, as well as books that Matillion will pay for. There are 2 books related to this topic that we think you'll find really useful. If you would like to read them, please order these and then expense them. The links for these are included on the greenhouse. We also encourage you to chat to the talent development team if you have any questions about anything covered in today's video. Finally, we hope you have enjoyed learning about micromessages. We hope you take some learning from today's content, and we look forward to seeing you soon.